Today we bring you three disturbing and unbelievable true stories from the American Civil War. Each one is filled with horror and shocking events that will leave you speechless, each in its own unique way. First, we'll tell you about a battle where everything that could go wrong went wrong. Second, we'll dive into a mystery that was only solved 140 years after the war. And finally, we'll show you how far a man can go for revenge. Let's begin. Number 1. Battle of the Crater. The summer of 1864 found the Union and Confederate armies locked in a deadly stalemate around the strategic city of Petersburg, Virginia. General Ulysses S. Grant, commanding the Union forces, knew that breaking through the Confederate defenses at Petersburg was essential to ending the war. But the heavily fortified lines, manned by General Robert E. Lee's battle-hardened troops, seemed impenetrable. In the midst of this deadlock, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pleasants, a former mining engineer, proposed an audacious plan. His idea was to dig a tunnel beneath the Confederate lines, pack it with explosives, and detonate it to create a massive breach. This explosion would allow Union forces to pour through the gap and potentially capture Petersburg. He took the idea up the chain of command and, to his surprise, it was eventually accepted. The men of the 48th Pennsylvania Infantry, many of whom were experienced coal miners, set to work. Despite facing numerous challenges, sabotage from their own command, and a lack of adequate tools and equipment, they managed to improvise and find solutions for everything they needed. After weeks of backbreaking labor and complete secrecy, the 511-foot-long tunnel was finally completed, reinforced with timber, and packed with 4 tons of gunpowder, ready for a big surprise. In the early hours of July 30, 1864, everything was set, and everyone was in anticipation. At 3:30 a.m., the fuse was lit, and the minutes went by with no explosion. Tension and confusion gripped the Union lines. The slow fuse had gone out at one of the splices, and to make it worse, it was the last splice before the junction between all the fuses that would light the powder. Finally, 2 men relit it and ran like hell out of the tunnel, barely making it out in time. At 4:44 a.m., the gunpowder detonated, creating a huge explosion. The blast created a massive crater 170 feet long, 60 to 80 feet wide, and 30 feet deep, instantly killing nearly 300 Confederate soldiers, sending debris and bodies flying into the air. The blast obliterated the Confederate fortifications at Elliott's Salient, leaving a massive gap in the defenses and causing chaos and disarray among the surviving Confederate troops. But what followed was a tragic series of missteps and miscommunications. General Ambrose Burnside had initially prepared several units of United States colored troops who were experienced and extensively drilled for the operation, to move quickly and organized to exploit the breach. However, at the last minute, General George Meade intervened, replacing the experienced black troops with less prepared white soldiers. This decision proved disastrous. When the explosion created the massive crater, confusion and hesitation took hold of the Union ranks. Instead of quickly moving around the edges of the crater to secure the breach, the inexperienced white troops wanted to take cover in the crater from enemy fire and rushed directly into it. But this quickly turned into a death trap. The steep, loose walls of the crater made it impossible for the soldiers to climb out, and they became densely packed in the confined space. The initial shock of the explosion had thrown the Confederate defenders into chaos, but they quickly regrouped. In a fierce counterattack, Confederate artillery and riflemen soon surrounded the crater. From their positions on the rim of the crater, they opened fire into the densely packed Union troops. The crater became a slaughterhouse. It was like Confederate soldiers were on target practice, picking off Union soldiers one by one. Union soldiers desperately tried to escape, but the walls were too steep and the ground unstable. They couldn't even fight back and were mowed down by Confederates above. One additional disturbing fact is that some black troops also charged and found themselves in the crater. Knowing that the Confederates would most likely kill black soldiers and any white soldiers fighting alongside them, the surviving white Union soldiers tragically turned on their own comrades, killing the black soldiers in a desperate attempt to save themselves. After relentless Confederate fire finally ceased, the scene at the crater was horrifying. The crater alone was now a mass grave for around 500 Union soldiers. The wounded and dying were left in the crater in agony under the hot July sun. By the end of the battle, the Union had suffered approximately 3,800 casualties, and the Confederates 1,500. Number 2. Glowing wounds. One of the more mysterious and eerie stories from the American Civil War is the phenomenon of glowing wounds. This bizarre occurrence was reported after the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862. After the brutal battle, many soldiers lay for 2 days in the cold, damp fields waiting for medical attention. It was during this time that some of the wounded noticed something strange and unsettling. Their wounds were glowing in the dark. This strange glow was first observed as a faint blue-green light emanating from the wounds of soldiers. Initially, this phenomenon was met with fear and disbelief. The soldiers who experienced it referred to it as angel's glow. What was even more remarkable, however, was that the soldiers whose wounds glowed seemed to have a higher survival rate and healed more quickly than those whose wounds did not. For about 140 years, the glowing wounds remained a mystery, an unexplained, haunting, and fascinating anecdote from the war. In 2001, 2 high school students, Bill Martin and Jonathan Curtis, whose parents were microbiologists, investigated this phenomenon and offered a compelling theory. Their research suggested that the glow was caused by glowing bacteria called Photohabdus luminescens. These bacteria live inside tiny worms that infect insects. When the worms release the bacteria into the insects, they produce a glowing substance called luciferase, which helps kill the insect and protects the worm from other germs. The conditions at Shiloh were perfect for these bacteria to thrive. The soldiers, lying in the cold and wet fields with open wounds, created an ideal environment for the bacteria to grow. The glowing bacteria not only made the wounds glow, but also produced natural antibiotics that killed other harmful bacteria, reducing infection and helping the wounds heal. Number 3. Ghost Sniper. John Jack Hinson was a peaceful farmer before the Civil War began. He lived with his family on a large plantation near the Tennessee River and didn't care much about politics or the war. He just wanted to live quietly and take care of his land. But one day, everything changed in such a disturbing way. Jack's 2 sons were out hunting when they were captured by Union soldiers. The boys were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Union soldiers, suspicious and on high alert, accused them of being Confederate scouts, or bushwhackers as they were called at the time. The boys had hunting rifles, which the soldiers took as proof of their involvement with the Confederate forces. Despite their denials, the Union soldiers weren't listening. Without any trial or proper investigation, the Union soldiers decided to make an example of Jack's sons. They brutally executed the boys and, in a horrific display, decapitated them. The soldiers placed the severed heads on the gateposts of Jack's plantation as a gruesome warning to others. This horrifying act filled Jack with a burning rage and a desire for revenge. Filled with hate, Jack Hinson turned into a deadly sniper and bushwhacker. Bushwhackers were irregular soldiers who used hit-and-run tactics, operating independently and often outside the formal military command. Jack bought a custom-made .50 caliber rifle, perfect for long-range shots and capable of hitting a man at over 500 yards. He knew the land well and used it to his advantage, finding hidden spots along the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers where he could take aim at Union soldiers. Hinson's first recorded kill as a sniper was a Union officer on a patrol boat. He also targeted Union supply lines, once disabling a steamboat with a single shot to its boiler, causing chaos and significant logistical setbacks. During the Battle of Johnsonville, Hinson's intelligence and sniping disrupted Union logistics, leading to a Confederate raid that destroyed millions of dollars worth of supplies. He used caves and dense forests to evade capture, living off the land for extended periods. Union soldiers soon began to fear him, even calling him a ghost. Despite many attempts to capture or kill him, Jack remained elusive and continued to operate. Jack's life as a sniper was brutal and lonely. He worked alone, driven by the memory of his murdered sons. Over time, it is estimated that he killed more than 100 Union soldiers. After the war ended, Jack Hinson quietly returned to his farm. He managed to avoid retribution and lived out his remaining years in peace. His story is quite ironic. He became a bushwhacker and deadly sniper only after his sons were wrongfully accused of exactly that. He showed how far one man could go to avenge his loved ones.